Okay, so we learned how to find the standard deviation of a set of data by hand, and that formula can take a little while to do, so it can be a lot more convenient if we know how to do it in a calculator. I'm going to show you 3 different calculators because how you do it depends on what calculator you're using. You should really probably just pick the one that you use the most often, stick with that one, and make sure you know how to do it on that calculator. Remember that on the EOCT you cannot use a graphing calculator. You have to use a scientific calculator on the EOCT, and so we're also only using a scientific calculator on any statistics problems we do in this class because we're getting ready for the EOCT eventually. So first off, let's just start with a garden variety TI-30, or this is a TI-30X, excuse me. But it really doesn't matter. Any calculator that looks somewhat like this is going to be the same way. So I only have 8 pieces of data just to try and make it go a little faster in terms of inputting my data. So the first thing I have to do is I have to tell the calculator that I'm going to input data. So I'm going to go up here to this button that says data, and I'm not pressing it. I'm going to do second and then press that. That gets me to stat, which is directly above there. So if I do second data, it's going to ask me, do I want to put in 1 variable data or 2 variable data? 2 variable data is like if you were doing ordered pairs, so that every piece of data has 2 parts, an X value and a Y value. We're just working with 1 variable data here, so I'm going to press enter. That's the equal button. Okay, once I've done that, the calculator is set to receive the data. Now I have to go back to press the exact same button again, but this time without the second. I just press data. It's going to ask me for my first data point. It's saying x sub 1 equals. So it's asking me to put in the first data point, which is 20. So I put in 20. Now the interesting thing about using this calculator is instead of pressing enter or anything like that, I have to press a down arrow. And the first time I press the down arrow, it takes me to this, which says FRQ equals 1. That's saying, what is the frequency of a 20? So like if I had 2 20s, I could put FRQ equals 2 and not have to put in a 20 2 different times. For most of the ones we're going to do though, it's not like we have 17 of one value or 36 of one value. So it's easier just to go ahead and put in all the values individually. So I have x sub 1 equals 20, down arrow, and we'll just say the frequency is 1. In other words, I have 120. Then I have a 23, down arrow. I only have one of them, so down arrow again. So basically I'm pressing down arrow twice after each piece of data. In other words, I put in 23, down arrow took me to frequency equals 1, down arrow again to the next data point. So 38, down arrow twice, 31, down arrow twice, 19, down arrow twice, 21, down arrow twice. Next we've got 24, and finally 29. Okay, I didn't press down arrow again because that's my last piece of data. If I did, it wouldn't be a big deal. I would just not put anything in for the next piece of data. Okay, now that I've got all the data points in there, so I've put them in x sub 1, x sub 2, all the way up to x sub 8 because I have 8 pieces of data. Now if I want to do computations with this or I find the calculations related to those pieces of data, I'm going to hit stat var or stat var, sometimes people say. So STATVAR, it's right beside data. And when I do that, all these things come up across the top. Now this one is actually, it's quicker on this particular part than other calculators. Putting in the data is a little bit slower on this calculator, but at this point I have one button and all of the parameters I might want to look at are are on the screen at one time. So the first thing I've got here is N. That means the number of pieces of data. We knew there were 8, so it's good that that says 8. The next thing, if I go to the right with a right arrow is X bar. X bar here says 25.625. That is my mean. I'm going to move over here. That is actually my sample standard deviation. We'll learn how to do that later. Right now we're just working with population standard deviation, where we look for this little sigma. Right beside the X you have the little sigma, Greek letter sigma. That tells me it's standard deviation. And this one tells me it's 6.122448448 and so on. So I would round it and say my standard deviation is approximately 6.12. Okay, that is doing it with a run-of-the-mill TI 30 or 30 series calculator.